Hello everyone and welcome back to the video. Today we're going to be talking about deer luring and why it suddenly became overpowered and basically the norm in most 1v1 Arabia games. And just to be clear, it's not just 1v1 Arabia that's affected by it, it's also in team games, it's also on different maps like Arena and different maps like Black Forest, where deer luring is just something that you pretty much always go for if you have the opportunity. But let's talk about why that's happening and why is it becoming more popular recently, whereas in the past there's kind of a decision that you had to go for or not in favor of scouting. For the longest time, deer luring was something that you can do, and it was known for like 15 years that you could deer lure. Chris was doing it and maybe even as early as 2005, and when it first was discovered, it was definitely a very cool thing. People usually were milling deer, but when they discovered you can lure it, you started luring the deer to your town center, saving you all that walking time for your villagers, not having to spend 100 wood on the mill, etc. It's a much better way to go about taking the deer. However, it came at a cost to your scouting, and for the longest time, for a bunch of years, people were saying you can lure one deer, you might be able to lure two, but I wouldn't lure 3 or 4 deer because then you're just scouting your opponent way too late. It's not worth the extra food. The scouting information is way too valuable, especially in a strategy game where you need to know what your opponent is doing to try to counter him and to try to be prepared yourself. However, in modern times, talking about the last 1 or 2 years, deer luring basically became a must. At least at the highest level, luring all of the deer, so all 3 or all 4 deer on Arabia, is basically the standard. Like, that's what you probably should do. And it's gotten so bad that people at like 1,000 elo are questioning, hey, I'm new to the game, should I already be luring deer? And of course the answer is no. If you're new to the game, focus on everything else. But then the harder question is, like, at 1400, should you focus on scouting or should you lure deer? You watch all the pro players, they're all luring deer. Then you feel like if you lure deer, you're not getting the scouting information. It's hard to predict what your opponent's going for. You're lacking that knowledge of the matchup, so you want to scout your opponent, but then you feel like you're missing out on the food. It's a very tricky situation and it's hard to understand exactly what to do. Well, listen, in this video I'm not going to explain what to do. To be honest with you, it's a very difficult situation and it's hard to come up with a suggestion. But what I will talk about here is what changed with deer luring. Why is it so popular now? Why does it feel like it's a must to lure all the deer? And then I'm going to talk about whether it is a problem, and if so, how do we fix it? I'm going to throw a bunch of ideas, and at the end of the video, I'm going to ask your thoughts to the community on this topic, because it's gotten so bad that people have started messaging me on Discord, on Twitch, whatever, about deer luring and how do we fix it? How do we solve it? A lot of people are simply fed up with it. But let's go ahead and go through it step by step to see exactly what's going on with deer luring right now. All right, so the first thing that's really changed over the last couple years that really made deer luring seem like a mandatory chore in Dark Age is the faster uptimes. This is like the main reason why deer luring is such a must. Faster uptimes means that you're going to get up to the next age quicker, and you're going to be having a more fragile economy, because if you up with like 18 villagers compared to 20 villagers, you'll have 2 less villagers working on the way up to feudal age. You'll also get there quicker, so you have less resources to work with. The way to counteract this is to lure in the deer, so you can delay stuff like horse collar. You don't need to pick it up right away since you have extra food under your TC, extra hunt. You also get a lot more food faster because the hunt gather rate of the deer is actually higher than that of the sheep and that of the berries and even that of the farm. So it's more efficient, you have more resources to work with, and you can delay making farms, allowing you to focus your first few minutes of feudal age on military, on scout production, or on archer production. Another thing that's worth noting is that having the more efficient scout in feudal age, it's faster and it has more line of sight, makes your scouting in feudal age a lot easier to do. And also, if you stay and lure deer throughout all of Dark Age and then scout your opponent only at the end, you don't risk losing your scout to the TC. Like, you will basically never lose your scout to the TC because you'll get to feudal age, you have extra line of sight, faster moving scout. You will not run into the TC as you used to in Dark Age from the start of the game. So it's a less risky way to play. It's very efficient. You can always lure in all 3 deer. It's very consistent, and you basically get the most efficient scouting pattern possible. The only difference is you're scouting a bit later, and that could cause some complications, but really not that much. So you're going to be luring deer with your slow scouts, and as soon as you get your fast scouts, near the end of Dark Age, early feudal, you're going to be able to scout your opponent and scout the map, and all is perfect. It's like the perfect way to play the game at the moment. But okay, what about what about if your opponent's going for some early rush? Is it a danger that we don't scout it? Well, the truth is, players nowadays, especially at the pro level, have better reactions. We understand the matchups better. We know what to expect, generally speaking. We can predict what our opponent will go for without even scouting it. And even if we miss something, even if we don't think of something and we get surprised, we have better reactions. We can easily quick wall. We play on lower ping, so quick walling and reacting is also made easier easier from the game itself. So even if your opponent is going some kind of drush, some kind of militia, and we don't scout it at all because we're luring deer, we can just quick wall or react perfectly to the militia coming in. That it's really not going to be that great of a situation for our opponent. It's not going to be that bad for us to be surprised by some militia. Another point is that infantry is quite weak right now in the meta, and that makes them less popular. So there's really not a crazy, not this big significant threat that's coming our way that we have to scout or else we're in danger. It's really just not a big deal. So even if infantry come in, we're going to probably be able to react and quick wall. And most of the time, let's be honest, infantry is simply not coming in. Even in the worst case scenario where we get forwarded, some people would argue that if you get forwarded, it's much better to have the extra food from the dealer than to scout the forward coming in. This is completely contrary to how it was like 5 years ago. 5 years ago, you almost had to scout the forward in order to have a chance to defend it because our reactions were worse. There's a bit more lag, so it's hard to, micro under intense circumstances when you're not ready for it. Tower on your wood line when you're surprised could be a really big game changer. Nowadays, people are so ready to react to whatever's coming their way that they just rather have a little bit of extra food to work with, have to delay farms, and be able to fight the forward with more army instead of just seeing it and preparing for it slowly. So even in this scenario, which would be considered the worst case scenario as far as missing scouting information, it's probably still better to have the extra food from the deer. All right, so this is the reasons why it's become more popular. Now let's talk about the important part of the video. Is it a problem? And if so, how do we fix it? So my perspective is that it's kind of a problem because number one, let's be honest here, nobody likes the dealer. Like, it's probably the most tedious thing ever. I personally don't mind it, but I also don't mind playing like 10 games, 15 games of 1v1 Arabia a day. Like, I'm probably the exception here where I can do the same thing over and over again. I don't really get bored of it. So for me, it's kind of fine. But like, objectively speaking, I feel like most people can agree luring deer is a tedious task. It's a chore. It's not something people look forward to when playing a game of AoE2. You probably only do it because you feel like you have to do it. So that's kind of how I view the situation. Like, it might not be the biggest problem, but at the very least, it's tedious. At the very, best, it's, a problem because it's happening every game. So it's clearly needing some change. Though that's like the spectrum I'm working with here. Even if you don't care about deer luring, you can agree that it's annoying to do. And if you absolutely hate it, you'd probably try to argue that it's overpowered. It's being done every game. It needs to change. So that's the spectrum I'm working with here. And let's go ahead and think of some ideas on how to change this. And at the end of the video, we'll leave it up to you guys for discussion in the comments. So the first thing I will mention, and this is actually point 0, is that we already tried making deer further away. And this is actually a suggestion that I gave for KOTD5, and I'm so sorry guys, I never meant for the suggestion to make it to the rank ladder. Let it be known, I gave the suggestion only for a pro tournament. They then decided to make it a rank ladder Arabia. I never said anything about that. So I gave the suggestion for a pro tournament on KOTD5 because my reasoning was that if you make the deer further away, you have less time to scout after luring the deer. So sure, you can go for all 3 deer, but then you have less time to scout. So it made it a lot harder to get all 3 or to justify going for all 3 dealers. What did this change? Pretty much nothing. Everyone still went for the deer. As crazy as that sounds, people still went for the deer even after making it further away. The alternative to luring your deer was to send your scout forward and to try to steal some other, resources from your opponent. Steal his sheep, steal his boar, maybe prevent him from luring deer. But it all revolved around getting extra food in the Dark Age. That's like the main thing to do with your scout. It has nothing to do with scouting your opponent. It has something to do with getting extra food and securing some animals. So let's be honest here, making the deer further away did not solve the issue. It just made it even more annoying. Sorry guys. Moving on to point number 1, this is the most extreme solution that I can think of. And it actually sounds tempting. Like, I think it might be good, but it probably needs testing. And you have to look at it from like the entire game's perspective, not just 1v1 Arabia. But the idea is to make deer unlurable. Firstly, this is already possible within the game. It was done for a map in the last tournament. What was that? I forgot the map's name, but it was the one where Viper lost to Leary in the semifinals, and people were criticizing him for not just booming. I think, Tear Garden. Yeah, Tear Garden. There was a few deer near like the berry patch area. They were actually unlurable. You lure them a couple times, they move, and then they go back immediately. So you can't lure them more than like once or twice in the same direction. Otherwise, they go back to their original spawning position. So there is an angle where you can make deer permanently unlurable. You make that the standard deer behavior. You push them once, they go. You push them a second time, they always run back, and they go back exactly to their starting position. What does this do? So if you make the deer unlurable, I would then suggest that you bring them closer, and you always have 4 deer in the group. So then milling them is a strategic option, and this would actually be a decision that you now have to make, because clearly scouting your opponent or not scouting your opponent is not that big of a cost. People just don't care about that. So making it that you have to mill and pay 100 wood and send 4 villas in a somewhat exposed location to take the deer, now that that is a bigger cost to invest in order to get the food. So now some civs would want to go for it. Like let's say Franks might say, you know, I'm fine with the berries, I don't need the deer. But something like Mongols will always want to mill the deer. So in this case, you have the strategic, you know, decision that you have to make every game. And if you go for it, your opponent can now send in a few militia, and it's a huge threat because you can actually snipe your deer, he can harass your vills on the mill. If you get forwarded and you're taking deer on the front, that could be horrible. There's a lot of extra factors to consider as far as taking the deer or not to take it. Now the guy who doesn't take the deer has more wood to work with. He didn't make a mill. It has an easier base to protect because he doesn't need to worry about his deer patch getting attacked. And, you know, he has a simpler game to play, but he's got less food to work with. It's a very interesting dynamic that I think could actually be a really good solution. This will also make Dark Age less tedious. It makes the game more intuitive because now the new players that come in, they don't have to worry about luring deer. They easily understand that you have to mill it. And let's be honest, most of them will probably mill deer. I don't know why. It just seems like the kind of thing that's appealing for newer players. So this just feels like a really good solution overall. In fact, now that I'm talking about it, I feel like I'm selling the idea. It's not even my idea, guys. Honestly, I don't even know if it's a good thing to go for, but I can't think of a single downside for this extreme solution. The only thing about it though is that it's very extreme. If we go down this path, it's going to be hard to like go back. So if we go down this path, everyone's got to be sure that this is the solution for it. Now, my personal opinion about this, it sounds good. It just feels like you need to really test it, and you have to think of all the different scenarios. Like you have to think of arena. Like arena, is it going to be worth milling the deer? Maybe you can make it that the deer goes twice in the same direction, so you can kind of push it a little. I don't know, but I would recommend that someone out there, if you want to make this change, you have to think of all the different situations where deer luring could be done, and you have to try to think if it's going to work out if we remove deer luring. And last thing with this whole like deer being unlurable, you could make it so a villager might be able to push the deer a little bit further because the villager could shoot the deer once. So you push the deer once, shoot it once, so it goes twice in the same direction. So maybe the villager can do a better job at luring the deer. Or maybe you just go very extreme and nobody can lure deer, nothing at all. I'll leave it up to you guys. The second option, or the second possible solution, is to make the gather rate of the deer slower. So you have less incentive to lure the deer. But I don't like this option much because then it also nerfs like milling the deer. And I don't think that needs a nerf. So I feel like this is a possible solution, but just not a good one. So we could probably ignore this one. And then the third solution that I can think of is to add RNG to deer on Arabia. So sometimes they don't spawn. So sometimes you might waste time looking for them when in reality they're not there. And they spawned way further away, like just in the middle of the map, but you don't actually have your own deer patch. This is a solution that I don't really like because I feel like adding RNG will screw people over in certain situations and doesn't really have that consistency that feels fair. So I don't really like the solution either. So really, I'm just leaving you guys with one solution, the extreme option. Either you make it unlurable or you have no way to fix the problem. And honestly, that's kind of where I'm at right now as far as like coming up with solutions. This is why I wanted to make this video open-ended. You've heard what I had to say. I've presented a few options. I don't even necessarily agree with any of these options. These are not necessarily my ideas. These are just ideas that I've heard around the community. And I want to present them to you guys and ask you guys, what do you think should be done with deer luring? Is it completely fine and should we stay the same? Should we find a moderate solution, or should we go for the extreme example and make deer unlurable so you have to mill them if you want to take them? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you guys want to share this on Reddit and start some discussion there, sure. If they welcome it, go for it. If you want to talk about this on Discords and whatnot, go for it. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I could make a follow-up video on this and kind of share some of the best opinions from the community. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys want more content from me, check me out on Patreon for the exclusive guides and content, as well as the builders that I offer in PDF color-coded format with a lot of extra spicy tips. And if you guys want to catch my live stream, check out my Twitch channel, link to both Patreon and Twitch in the description below. And that's gonna be it for this video. Like, comment, subscribe, and have a good rest of your day. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.